Welcome to Forward Thinking, taking a deep dive into some of the biggest challenges facing real estate and tech today. We meet some of the most inspiring minds in a bid to find sustainable solutions.
Welcome to another edition of Forward Thinking by Locale, and this afternoon I am really excited to be chatting to Sue Brown from Real Estate Balance. We're talking all sorts of different things. But first of all, Sue, welcome. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks very much for
having me. And before we get to Real Estate Balance and sort of the sort of issues of today, I wanted to know a little bit about you and your journey to today and to Real Estate Balance, really.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, quite straightforward actually. I mean, quite straightforward if you're a Londoner, I think, because I'm in London, born and bred. Born at St Thomas's, as it happens, brought up in southwest London, which explains being a supporter of Chelsea, because we've just been talking about Chelsea Football Club. Brought up in a family where I was the first person to ever go to university.
Oh, wow.
Which I think, makes me working class, really, or did make me working class before I moved to Chelsea. Went to a girls' grammar school in Battersea, when it was still Battersea, before it became Battersea. Went from, standard girls' grammar school in South London, where you were just encouraged to work hard and do quite well academically, which I did. Went from there to University College London, where I studied history. The first job that I applied for when I left university a very, very, very long time ago, I applied to become a grad trainee at the London Borough of Wandsworth, and I was actually well qualified for the job because I'd had a year out. I mean, when my kids had a year out between school and university, they went around the world. I worked for the London Borough of Lambeth, which is a bit sad, really. So I was well qualified for the job, and I was told they weren't going to give it to me because I was a woman. Wow. And this is actually in the 20th century, believe it or not. But I mean, it's 45 years ago. If you can imagine that 45 years ago, somebody could still tell you that you weren't going to get a job because you're a woman, it's quite frightening, really. And that's probably made me what I am. They did give me the job in the end, but I only lasted there a year because it was quite a strange place to work as a woman. I then went from there to another local authority. I worked for Shirley Porter at Westminster, that nobody will remember, but she was like the local government equivalent of Mrs Thatcher. I went there from there to London Docklands Development Corporation, where I really got into property. Okay. And London Docklands Development Corporation, as a 25-year-old, was a very, very, very exciting place to be. Then pulled myself out of there in 1986 with the man who then became my second husband. And we ran our own real estate comms company for 19 years. We were bought out firstly by Financial Dynamics and then FTI Consulting, which is a big American consulting firm. I then worked for London First for 3 years, and then I've been in this job now. I took this job over on April Fool's Day in the middle of a pandemic, so make of that as you will. But I've been here now I've been running Real Estate Balance for the last just over 3 years.
Obviously, you spent a lot of time in comms and real estate comms. How has that evolved for you over the years?
Well, I think real estate comms has evolved hugely. I think when my husband and I started and we were running our business, it's fair to say that real estate comms at that stage was the sisters of agents fluttering their eyelashes, really. And I like to think that we didn't exactly create real estate comms, but I hope made it slightly more serious. Worked for lots of big clients. Probably one of the most telling things we did was help create MIPIM, which obviously is the world's largest property show, and which actually over the years has, strangely enough, been criticised for all sorts of things, but especially criticised for lack of diversity. But we were always obviously working to make sure that it was as diverse as could be. And I don't know if you've been to MIPIM, But I mean, I've just came back from my 32nd MIPIM, and this year it was all about ESG and D&I, which is a very good thing. But yeah, I mean, clearly, I mean, when I was in comms and actually doing comms work, clearly social media didn't really exist in the sort of way it does now. So very obviously comms has changed quite dramatically. I mean, you know, it remains the same in terms of you have to have good relationships with journalists. But yeah, the whole thing is, I mean, as you might imagine, we do a lot of comms work in real estate balance because, you know, my background, and I've got a very, very good PR consultant, a man called Paul Brown. But obviously it's not just about, you know, getting into mainstream media, but it's a lot of social media as well, which I mean, I still struggle to actually do. I mean, we do lots of social media work, but I clearly don't place it because I probably wouldn't know how. But anyway, that's probably the way in which real estate comms has changed mainly.
Do you feel that communications... I feel when I first started, it was kind of almost the poorer sibling of marketing, if you like. It was kind of always a little secondary. And everybody's like, oh, it's all about the marketing. The comms is sort of a bit of an afterthought. Do you feel that's kind of now switched a little bit more and people are maybe putting a bit more emphasis on comms?
Well, I don't think I ever believed that we were the secondary practice, really.
Interesting.
I think I always thought we were more important, but perhaps that's just because I'm conceited or arrogant or something. Yeah, I mean, perhaps that's the case. I mean, I look, the whole world's about communications now, isn't it? You know, 24-hour media.
Absolutely.
You just can't get away from it. So the way in which organisations or individuals present themselves is absolutely fundamental, isn't it?
Absolutely, yeah.
So, as I say, I would never have bought that comms was the secondary discipline. As I say, perhaps I was just too arrogant to think otherwise. But yeah, I mean, comms is everything now, isn't it? I mean, how people perceive you is absolutely fundamental.
It is about
I mean, the
reputation.
other thing I should add is that, I mean, when I was doing real estate comms, I did a lot of what would now be called planning comms. And I mean, interestingly, we're now based at Liverpool Street, but I did all the comms work and all the public consultation work around Spitalfields. So around Old Spitalfields Market, which literally is just over there. Which was fascinating because at that stage, obviously it was the old fruit and veg market. It had been bought out by an organisation called Spitalfields Development Group in 1997. It required an act of parliament to change it. The new fruit and veg market moved to down to near where the Olympic Park is. And we had huge amounts of local opposition to the market being redeveloped. But if you go round there now, I mean, it really does mark, I think, the start of the, you know, move away from just the city into the East End.
Absolutely,
and I think that, you know, all the stuff that's happened on Truman's Brewery site and all the stuff that's now happening at Bishopsgate Goodyard, all of that stuff, all really started there. But comms was a really, really fundamental part of the way in which we of that scheme.
I mean, it tells the story in terms of placemaking, in terms of, you know, actually preserving that history and, you know, the heritage of the sites as well.
Yeah,
And
well,
there's so
interesting.
much of
So I've got a history degree, so I suppose I have quite a strong sense of history. But of course, it was a really fascinating site because it's called Spitalfields because it was the site of the St Mary, the Spital Hospital. But also, it was the site of Roman London. You know, it was the burial ground for Roman London. So when we started, we did a lot of archaeology work there. And because there's a large Bangladeshi population here now, there was a lot of sensitivity about not looking at dead bodies. So we hoarded the site round and we used to just have portholes looking into it. But we actually ran a big archaeology centre there. And in fact, it's fair to say that in comms terms, we had better comms arising from that than we probably did from anything else. But we really did respect the history, you know. So there are porters' badges from the old Spitalfields Fruit and Veg Market actually, incorporated in the paving and things like that, and the charnel house is still there. Some interesting stuff. I've perhaps to say, because I've got quite a strong sense of history, I love the idea I think if you take an area's history and can incorporate that in the placemaking, that's great. The other thing about round here, of course, is it's had a succession of immigration. So it was the French Huguenots running away from the revocation of the Edict of Nantes in 1685. I've told you I was a historian somewhere along the line. And then you had all the pogroms of Jewish people fleeing from Russia and other parts of Eastern Europe in the 19th century, and obviously a huge Bangladeshi population around here now.
You mentioned you were one of the brains behind MIPIM.
Well, brains might be overstating it, but certainly basically the people that run MIPIM, which is now RX, it was Reed Meadham for a number of years. At that stage, there was a number of shows which were run by actually TVS, so it was Southern TV, and they were running two television shows a year in Cam, and a music show called Meadham. And I think they were, if I'm entirely honest, this is a cynic in me, they were probably looking around for an industry which was quite, would look after itself, I suppose, and decided they'd launch a property show. And we, at that stage, were working for Rosehall Stanhope, Stanhope still exists.
Yeah.
Who at that stage were going to be developing King's Cross. And so MIPIM, the organisation MIPIM, went to two developers in each of the main territories. So in the UK, they went to Rosehall Stanhope, as I say, at that stage we're going to be developing King's Cross, and Olympia and York, who obviously were developing Canary Wharf. And we were working for Rosehall Stanhope. So we got, my husband always says at that stage, if we were asked to go to Watford, he got excited. But all of a sudden he found himself on a plane, firstly to Paris to meet with Reed Meadham, and then down to Cannes to look at where this event was going to take place. I went down to a show called MIP TV in April 1989. In fact, 2 months after giving birth to my daughter. Life was very different then. And sort of went down, was picked up by limousine at Nice Airport and taken round and fed champagne. And I went to this show called MIP TV, where the people on the next table were selling Coronation Street to Zimbabwe. It was that sort of show. And as I say, we were offered champagne with anything we wanted. And I came back and wrote a report and said, yes, I think Rosehall Stanhope should be there. And on the back of that, we then got taken on to do all the communications work.
Brilliant.
And my husband, the company that my husband's just standing down from as executive chairman, my husband's actually done the comms work on it ever since it started.
Wow.
Until now. So it's been an interesting time, an interesting thing to watch as it's grown and changed. And as I say, this year, big changes in terms of a lot of concentration now on ESG and D&I.
Do you think that's meaningful? Obviously there's a lot of discussion and there's a lot of events happening, but is that translating into action now?
Look, it's a big issue, isn't it? Real estate balance. It's at the essence of what we are.
Yeah.
And we can talk a bit more about real estate balance in a minute, about how it came about. But literally, the lunch and learn session, as we call it, that I've just been in, we were talking about this. Has there been change in the industry? I've been in the industry for 40 years, and yes, there has been huge change. Has it been quick enough? No. But does that mean you stop trying? I don't think it does. You have to affect change. And if you're not talking about it, then change is never going to happen. Quite prepared to accept that, if it's just all a talking shop, that's bad news. But really what Real Estate Balance is about raising awareness of the issues around the lack of senior women in real estate, the lack of people of colour in real estate, and the lack of people from working class backgrounds into real estate. And to my mind, those are the things you've got to be talking about to affect change. Is it happening quickly enough? No, it's not. But as I say, if we all stop talking about it, then it could all die a death. But then people equally say to me, well, what about the people who are not interested and don't really buy the concept of diversity and inclusion in the real estate industry? And I genuinely think that if they don't do that, they will no longer exist. I mean, you know, thank God. I mean, my kids, we're just talking about, I mean, my children are 34 and 31, and my son actually is in the industry, and he's white and he's middle class, went to a posh school, and I say to him, Ben, you must just hate me because, you know, I'm stand for everything that you're not. But both my kids are very woke, I'm proud to say, and sort of very much believe in what I do. But I just don't think young people are, you know, going to buy for much longer the concept that you actually discriminate against people on the basis of gender or colour or class. So I think, you know, it's not an option, is it? It's something we have to do. I mean, I have a view that actually it's morally wrong to exclude people on the basis of gender or racial background or social background. But I mean, all the evidence shows, and McKinsey have done lots and lots of work in this area, that more diverse organisations are more successful organisations. So when I say I think people that don't think you've got to move with the times won't survive, I just don't think they will, because people are just no longer going to, you know, just no longer going to buy into things, are they, which exclude people, as I say, based on gender or race or class. I mean, you know, people have got to change.
So, April Fool's Day 2020. And it was day one of Real Estate Balance.
In the middle of a pandemic.
In the middle of a pandemic. How did you get to that point?
What do you mean, how did I get to April the 1st, or what did I do once I got there?
Both.
Well, how I got there was, as I say, I'd been working in real estate comms consultancy for a number of years, and then real estate comms consultancy, or a particular part of it, decided they no longer wanted me. And then I went to work for an organisation called London First, and if I'm entirely honest, I went to London First, and I thought that would be my last job because I am very old. But this job came up, I applied for it. I mean, went through all the proper due processes, was interviewed and things. And got the job. And I mean, in a way, it's the culmination of everything. I've been fighting for the role of women in business for years and years and years. And my husband and I ran our own business for 19 years, and then we sold it twice. But when we went into larger organisation, I ran the women's networks in those larger organisations. But when I was at FTI Consulting, which was the consultancy that I worked for, I was running the women's network there. And I mean, at that stage, I think there were 90 senior managing directors, very American concept, in London, and only 7 of us were women. But as I looked around the organisation, and this was 2015, so a long time ago, what struck me was that, let alone was there very few senior women, but there were far fewer people who were either black or brown. And it's, you know, it occurred to me then that actually we had far bigger issues in relation to race than we did in relation to gender. So when I became Managing Director of Real Estate Balance, I did say to my chair, I didn't come into this job just to replace white middle-class middle-aged men by white middle-class middle-aged women. That coincided with George Floyd being murdered in the States. And I think had that not happened, whether or not I would have got through the board that we should now take on issues around race and ethnicity and issues around social mobility as well, I don't know. But I think, you know, the George Floyd murder just made them think, yes, we've got to do this now. And then when I started going to members and said, we're now looking at issues around race and ethnicity and social mobility as well, people actually said to me, well, good, because if you hadn't been looking at that as well, we'd probably say, well, you know, we'd come out. And what I find now, I've got 121 members now. And I've got all the big organisations in real estate in membership. What I find now when I go around, the big issue that people want to talk about is social mobility. I think, you know, people, as I say, they can either be, you know, think this is a moral imperative, as I do, or I think people just think, you know, they're reducing the talent pool if they go against people because, again, go against people because they're a woman or they're brown or black or they're, you know, from the wrong social class. But I do think that people, you know, a lot of people realise that you just, you know, if you exclude people from your talent pool, you will go wrong. I mean, thank God that people think like that.
And do you think there, you know, because obviously a lot of people are concerned about the gender disparity, particularly at senior level. But what about at that sort of entry level? Has that improved?
No, I mean, well, funnily enough, I mean, again, just the session I've just been at, I think you would find, if you think about the agents who, you know, most people who are in property, I mean, not on the comms side, obviously, not if you're a lawyer, because that's a very particular part of the real estate industry. But most people who are operating in real estate have been at one of the agents at some point. I think what you'll find is the agents, for the most part now, are 50-50 at entry level, you know, 50% men, 50% women. But what happens is, you know, so 50-50, probably for the most part through people's 20s. And then women start dropping off in their 30s. Now, some of that is clearly explained by having children, but I think it's a lot more than that. I think that women come out of the industry because they just find it a difficult industry to work in, because, you know, there's been an element in real estate that if you don't play rugby or you don't play golf or you don't shoot or do those sorts of things, or you don't drink yourself senseless, I suppose, at the other, you know, the other extreme, that actually you're not going to get on. And I think, you know, the big change, what we're concentrating on in real estate balance now is cultural change, is just trying to affect change in organisations that, you know, you don't need to, you know, you don't need to play rugby or golf or shoot or get pie-eyed every night of the week just to continue, you know. And that's a good thing. And I think, you know, same thing, I mean, there's an awful lot of organisations now working in real estate which is about promoting women. I mean, probably too many. I mean, one of the other things we do now is we run something called Network of Networks, which is about trying to bring all the organisations together who are working in D&I and real estate, just and actually ultimately to just try and perhaps stop duplication. But, you know, there are a lot of women's organisations, I think, growing up, because I think traditionally women, you know, who are coming into the industry felt quite lonely. So they were looking, you know, to their own, if you like, to get some support. And the culture, as I say, the cultural change is something which we're pursuing all the time.
And how do you sort of affect change culturally? If you know, a company comes to you and says, you know, we need to improve the culture here. What are the kind of those key core elements that you would be looking at?
Well, I think, I mean, you know, you can't change what you can't measure, first of all. So we spend a lot of time at Real Estate Balance looking at data and trying to improve data. And I mean, we've had a data working group, and we produced a very good document last year about actually collecting D&I data in the real estate industry. So that's, you know, one way of doing it. Then the other way is the whole idea behind Real Estate Balance is the promotion and promulgation of best practice. So, you know, there are some companies that do it very well, and we have a very lively, what we call a toolkit, which we may be about to rename, which looks at, we've got a series of case studies on there, looks at who's doing it well, who's not. I mean, it's harder to get people to admit they're not doing it well, but it's very much about the sharing of best practice.
Yeah.
It's very much about learned experience. That's the whole concept that it's about, and yeah, I mean, the whole sort of idea behind real estate balance is that people should actually put some of their competitive nature to one side for a bit and actually just try and learn from each other. That's the whole principle on which we exist.
And do you find that people are, collaborating?
Yeah,
they are
for the most part.
learning.
For the most part, I think. Certainly, I think people become less competitive and think that they can learn from their peers, and that's basically what it's about.
Yeah. And how do you think, I sometimes think, particularly at the sort of entry level, that obviously a lot of this, it's systematic changes also need to happen, for more girls to be going into STEM subjects, for example, or for ethnic background children, so of Asian origin or whatever, to be going into non-medical or the traditional.
Well, yeah, I mean, I've got two Asian families because my brother is married to a woman from Mumbai, and my daughter is married to a chap who's half Punjabi. It's to stop people, particularly from Asian backgrounds, so excuse me for saying this. No,
absolutely.
But to stop them becoming a lawyer, an accountant, or a doctor, or an engineer, because clearly that's what, and it happens, I think, in black families as well. That people want to see their kids going to what would be designated professions. I mean, I think parents that want to see their kids become lawyers or accountants, perhaps because they're going to earn a few bob. Well, actually, you can earn quite good money in property as well. Absolutely. So yeah, I mean, a different part of the forest. I mean, we because we're a business organisation. It's not as if, there are other organisations, there's Pathways to Property, who have done huge amounts of work in getting bright kids from working class backgrounds to look at property as as a sector to move into. So that's not what we do as our primary function, but clearly getting more people to understand what property is about is a really important part, I think, of what we need to do as an organisation and what anyone promoting property needs to do. And I
guess part of that is also then to promote the fact that it is inclusive.
And inclusive. And also, I've just spoken about working in Spitalfields where, I genuinely think, commercial property actually underlie the whole of the regeneration of Spitalfields. Commercial property underlies the whole of the regeneration of Canary Wharf. And people can argue, is that regeneration, is it property development? A number of arguments I've had about that over the years. But I really do think you can affect change through regeneration.
It underpins much of the community.
Yes, so, but the other thing, of course, is property is so wide, obviously we've talked about regeneration, planning, architecture, engineering to a certain extent, project management. It's a whole sort of variety of professions that people can go into. But the industry probably doesn't sell itself particularly well. I'm very, very friendly with Sam McClary, who's the editor of EG, and we have this conversation constantly. And we all of us, I think we all of us have got an obligation to actually try and persuade people. As I say, my son was at quite a posh school, and my husband and I always put ourselves up to sort of go to parents' evenings, careers evenings, and sell one property and two communications. But he went to the same school as Nigella Lawson's kids, and so all the dads were all queued up waiting to speak to Nigella Lawson, and that really didn't help in terms of us promoting property or communications.
Should have done a brand partnership with Nigella, and then it would have worked.
So they were far more interested in Nigella than they were in talking to us about property or communications, sadly. I wonder why that was, but anyway.
Yeah, I know. Interesting. And could you tell me a little bit about the CEO program that you have as well?
Because I sort of a month before Real Estate Balance started, which was in October 2015, which is where you got the 2015 date from. Myself and Sam McClary, who is now the editor of EG, and at that stage was the deputy editor, set up something called Rewire, which was the recognition and empowerment of women in real estate, which is the biggest mouthful ever. But we couldn't call ourselves Women in Property, and we really wanted to call ourselves Wire because the Idris Elba thing was very popular at the time. We thought that was quite funky. But there is already an organisation called Women in Real Estate, which is an American organisation, and they got quite shirty with us. But I mean, Sam and I, we first of all excluded all men, and then we're going to build an organisation from bottom up. Although we did get the Countess of Wessex to actually launch our organisation, so yeah, as one does. But Real Estate Balance, when they started, probably were a bit more adult than we were really. And they did two things. First of all, they included men right from the start. If you decided if you're going to have gender parity, that did mean that you had to have both genders. And I'm now going to get in trouble about non-binary and everything. Apologies, but but they also decided that you couldn't affect change in the real estate industry unless you actually got CEOs on board. So they got CEOs on board right from the start. And if you want to become a member of Real Estate Balance, you can only become a member of Real Estate Balance if your CEO signs up to 10 CEO commitments. And some of those are slightly motherhood and apple pie about, having D&I policies and things. But there's sensible stuff there like, not being on a platform unless it's gender neutral. And we're trying now to, not be on a platform unless it's race neutral, which is sometimes more difficult to achieve. But again, just some fundamental things it's just about thinking, I think, about how you're operating and how you're going about your everyday business.
And what's the response been from CEOs after signing up?
We have really, really, really good buy-in from CEOs. We're now at 121 real estate organisations, all of whose CEOs have signed up to that. And I'm sure there some of those 121 CEOs have probably been persuaded to come into Real Estate Balance by some of their staff. But without the CEO commitments, without the CEO having signed the commitments, we don't let them in. So, we're very, 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 very lively CEO network. We've got a very, very lively Next Gen network committee. The issue we do have, and this is always true, I think, you'll find a lot of D&I organisations. When I was running the Women's Network at Financial Dynamics and FTI Consulting, again, we had major support at the top of the organisation, both male and female, and quite a lot of support at the entry level. But it's the people in between that's often the difficult ones to sign up. And we're doing a lot of work in Real Estate Balance now to get to what we're calling, what Theresa May called the forgotten middle, but, doing a lot more work in terms of inclusive leadership and the way that impacts upon people in, mid-range in organisations.
And how do you empower that middle, that sort of middle?
Well, I think there's lots of things you can do. We're now looking at major sponsorship programmes, for example, where we think organisations, especially in relation to gender, for example, we're now encouraging our members to adopt big sponsorship programs where often it will be a senior man bringing on a more junior woman. And when I say a more junior woman, it can be quite a senior woman, but not as senior as, as at not board level. So just encouraging people to, to bring people on. As I say, in terms of, we obviously run a lot of events where we talk about all these things. Every time we run an event, we go through quite a procedure of should we hold this event in the morning when people might be taking their kids to school, or should we hold it in the evening when you know, perhaps kids have gone to bed and you can do things virtually at that stage. So it's thinking about all those things all the time, and the way in which people behave and react with each other. That's basically, you know, how we go about doing our business.
Yeah, interesting. And you mentioned obviously that you've worked with Sam McClary a lot closely. What role does the property media play in this?
I think it has
agenda?
a huge role. Yeah, I think it has a huge role. I mean, Sam has been the most amazing proponent of D&I in the real estate industry. You know, she's asked questions which others might not want to answer. And certainly, I mean, you know, EG had a pavilion at MIPIM for the first time this year and did a lot of work in the D&I space. So, yeah, Sam, you know, really deserves all the plaudits she gets for actually really pursuing this. But, you know, other publications are now looking at it more seriously, I think. I mean, Property Week are now doing a lot of work in this space. But, you know, we've been doing quite a lot with BizNow. We've done stuff with CoStar. We've done stuff with React News. Again, I think it goes to the same point that unless people now take D&I seriously, they won't be taken seriously as organisations. And I think a lot of organisations realise that.
Obviously, as Locale, we sort of sit in a slightly middle space, if you like, between real estate and technology.
Yeah.
How do you view kind of the D&I space with prop tech firms?
All right, this is my favourite topic. I mean, I think that prop tech, I get quietly, funnily enough, again, I've just been having a conversation about this. The real estate industry has lots of issues. I accept that entirely. But I think a lot of us are trying very hard. That might not be good enough, but we are. I do get slightly upset when people say, but the technology industry is very good at this, because I don't think it is. I think the technology industry is very good in relation to ethnicity, but I think the property industry is still not very good in relation to gender.
The prop tech industry.
Prop tech industry. Yeah, it's not very good in relation to gender. Yeah. As I say, I think very good in relation to race and ethnicity. But I don't think you get an awful lot of senior women doing in prop tech. Now, everyone's going to say, but there's so-and-so and so-and-so and so-and-so.
There are. I mean, we're quite proud as Locale because we've, and I mentioned this to you before, that we've got 50% women in the workforce.
Yep.
We've got senior women, sitting at the leadership team and in the board, which is great. So, and I think that's something the guy's been very passionate about in terms of his approach to developing the business, which is great. But we don't see enough of it. I agree, elsewhere, and I think we look at peers and there's not that many,
I mean, my daughter's in the tech industry, and I mean she's a PhD, and she's worked for a number of tech companies now, and again and again and again, a lot of the technicians tend to be men, and they're the ones that are treated very, very well, and I think women not so well. So I mean, I'm not sure that any industry has all the answers. I mean, all the recent gender pay gap stuff was, education was top in terms of gender pay gap, top or bottom, the worst performing sector in terms of gender pay gap. Then construction and financial services, and I can't remember exactly where real estate and tech are. But clearly, gender pay gap's pretty real, isn't it? That's that's very real in terms of just talking about what people are earning. And as I say, education worst, followed by financial services and construction. But yeah, I mean, it's the importance of data again, because as I say, you can't change what you can't measure. So all the time, it's about how you measure things.
And do you feel, because now obviously we've been hearing D&I for a while, and now a lot of people are talking about equity as well.
Yes.
And do you feel that is the direction that it should be going in, equity is also, neatly falling into that, and becoming the sort of that threesome there.
Yeah. I mean, that seems fine to me. In some ways, whatever you call it doesn't. Well, I don't think whatever you call it particularly matters. I mean, ultimately, it's about, as I say, to me, it's just about not excluding anybody.
Yeah.
It goes back all the time that you don't exclude people on the basis of gender, race, or social background. It's just about making opportunity for all, whatever phrase you want to use.
You spoke about the lack of diversity, gender diversity, particularly sort of at that top senior level, in boards. What are the challenges? Why are we struggling to break through there?
Well, I think, funnily enough, the gender diversity on boards isn't bad, because I think that what a lot of companies have done is actually it's easier to appoint a non-exec director than it is an executive. So a lot of property companies have appointed female NEDs. The big issue is actually is clearly developing a number of female execs, because by definition you can bring NEDs in. I'm not saying NEDs haven't got very useful experience, but you can bring NEDs in regardless of background or what they've done. They've not got to work themselves up the food chain, if you like, which obviously with a lot of executive positions, it is a process of time. And that's why the big issue is if it's 50-50 at gender level, entry level, it's why you can't lose women along the way. I think a lot of our work has to be concentrated on how you can bring women in at entry level and then sort of watch them, go through and not drop out, either because they've had children or because they feel uncomfortable in an industry that might still be, deemed to be male dominated, or, as I say, male dominated by men that are doing things that women might not naturally do. So it's why cultural change is the biggest thing I think that we have to achieve.
And ultimately, what is that legacy you want for real estate balance?
Well, I at a personal level, because I won't go on much longer. Even I have to stop working at some stage. I just want to think that, certainly at a personal level, that I've made a difference when I finally retire. And I think that's the same thing with real estate balance. I just want people to think, yes, they did make a difference, and people can judge us or not, on that. When Sam McClary and I started Rewire in September 2015, we sort of said, if we're still in business in 5 years, we failed. Well, obviously 5 years has long come and gone. I'm just hopeful that actually, as I say, with my kids' generation, that actually we won't still be having these conversations in 40 years' time. We have to effect change at some time, don't we? But but that applies not just in real estate. It applies, right across the board. That women, as I keep saying, neither women nor people of colour nor people from a particular social background are excluded on the basis of those things. They don't measure somebody. They don't. I'm not measured by the fact that I'm white or I wasn't born with a silver spoon in my mouth. I should be measured by a woman, or being born with a silver spoon in my mouth. I should be measured by what I can do, shouldn't I? It's about meritocracy, isn't it? So, as I say, I'd like to think that we made some sort of difference. Whether we did or not is for others to judge, isn't it?
Just before we finish, obviously, I know you're a big football fan. But I was also
a big football fan before. I support Chelsea. I'm not sure that makes me a big football fan. Or just very sad.
But slight left field question in a way, I guess, is it's great also to see the diversity in football with, you know, more of the women's football, you know, on TV and mainstream. I mean, that must be very satisfying as well.
Oh, yeah. I mean, yeah. And I mean, funnily enough, we're football mad in my family. But my second stepson, who is, I mean, more football mad than anyone I've ever met, and was a very lively England supporter for a number of years, and actually has 3 season tickets. I mean,
wow.
One for Fulham, one for Notts Forest, and one for Rangers. I mean, doesn't even bear thinking about.
Incredible.
But he's really rude about women's football. And when we won the Euros last year, I mean, I took such delight, you know, why can the women do it and, you know, the men can't, you know, because clearly, I mean, I do actually remember the World Cup, you know, 66, I was 10 at the time, and so I remember sitting and watching it. And we were very, say, always been big footballing family, it's very, very excited by that. But when the women won the Euros last year, I thought they were just magnificent.
Yeah.
And yeah, but it's funny enough, I mean, they're doing it really well in football now, aren't they? Because I think now every girl in every school now has to learn to play football, don't they? Which is a really good thing. Yeah. And certainly I've got a step-granddaughter who's now doing cricket and everything. I mean, it's just, it goes back to this thing about the idea you should be excluded from anything on the basis of, so I keep saying gender or race or social background is nonsense.
Absolutely. Well, on that note, thank you very much for your time. It was lovely to chat.
Good, thank you.
And we'll look forward to having more chats in the future.
Thank you.
All right.
We hope that Chelsea beat Brentford tonight. I somehow doubt it.